Dear readers, today we are joined by a remarkable individual who has dedicated her life to helping others find peace and meaning. Started their journey from as an immigrant in Canada, and they were exposed to the transformative power of Eastern philosophies like yoga, meditation, and holistic healing programs at a very young age. And this early exposure ignited a passion for understanding the human mind and alleviate suffering in our guest today. After moving to the West, they pursued a rigorous academic path, earning degrees in psychology, counseling, and ultimately a PhD in clinical psychology. This pursuit was driven by a deep desire to understand their own struggle, find a meaning in their own life, and help others to deal with insecurities, anxieties, and develop effective tools for healing. Dear readers, we are honored and we are very much excited to invite Dr. Ayesha to our podcast today. Dr. Ayesha, welcome.
Thank you so much, Shaman. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. That was really, really just so heartfelt. I am honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start with the introduction of the introductory lines. That how your early exposure to Eastern philosophies like yoga and meditation influenced your journey into the clinical psychology, because basically you are a living bridge between Eastern epistemology and Western epistemology. So please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I love that idea of the bridge. I've never thought of it that way, but I really do love that. I think I'll
No,
always.
you are, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So it is so interesting because, just talking to you has really made me excited. You share a little bit about your experience with meditation and mindfulness, and I can see it in your energy and just the kindness that you have. And I think about that when I think about my journey growing up. I grew up in Canada, visited India a lot because my parents were very, very adamant about us holding on to our culture because it was so important for them. And I was 5 when we moved here. And some of my earlier memories, when I think about what my culture represented, I'd go back to India and I was about 7, and I just wanted to share this little story. My great-grandmother, she would, I look back now what she was teaching me. The teaching was never literal. No one really would sit us down and say, these are the teachings. It was visceral and it was very experiential. So it would and I think I had to come back and then learn these concepts later on in my life through the academic pursuits. But the experiential feelings were of connection, going within, service. There's more to life than just ourselves. And I think that's what I learned a lot from my family. So my great-grandmother, she would call me over. I was the youngest great-grandchild she had. And she would take her roti, which roti is, I think everybody has an idea of roti, right? Whether it's a tortilla or whether it's bread, however we symbolize that, our food. She would take her roti and she would tear it in half, and then she would give it to me and she would say, go feed the birds. And so very young, I said to her, no, there's more roti. I'll go get another one. And she would say, no, this one. And what I learned from that was she had to give of her food. Before she could eat, there was the service of offering food to others, especially perhaps God's beautiful creatures that were dependent on us for them to eat. And then what I learned later on was she could have done this herself, but she did it from my hand. And when we think of karma and this whole idea of To me, karma is not just the deed, it is the intention behind the act, right? It is the seed. It is the intention, not just the action. And so she never said the words, but what I understood later on was she wanted me to get the good karma of her actions. And so it was just this growing up of these types of experiences again and again, of giving, of service, of sacrifice, of love, compassion, kindness. These were just woven into my childhood from the people that I had the privilege of learning from.
Yeah. I never thought it that way. I'm really like blown away by the idea that karma is such a common word in both East and West these days, and for a very long time as well.
Yeah.
But whatever the lines I have heard about karma these up until this point, it was really interesting that you are saying that it is not the action only, the intention behind the action is
Mm,
also a very big part of karma.
mm.
Such a powerful line because yeah, and it gives you a sense of responsibility. And most of the cases, our thoughts produces the action. So intention shapes our thoughts.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
that shapes our action. Such a powerful line. So you mentioned insecure. You're saying something? Sorry.
No, no, no. I was just going to say thank you for saying that. I agree with that 100%. Because again, when we look at later on in life, then where do these actions come from? And you're right,
Yeah.
come from our thoughts. The thoughts are the seeds,
Yes.
and the actions or the behavior or the outcome is the tree, right,
Yeah.
of that thought. So that is the intention. Yeah.
And such a powerful story you have shared about your grandma. And after coming to the West, so you mentioned like first generation immigrant or second generation immigrant, it does not matter, but shifting from one particular set of lifestyle to another particular set of lifestyle is always challenging. It is always full of anxieties and insecurities. So, how all these experiences, you had this visceral and integral part of Eastern philosophical education from your family, which was ingrained in your socialization process. And then you came into this country, and how all this shift, this upbringing, and this shift experience of this shifting experience shaped your understanding of trauma and healing, if you please.
Yes, thank you. And you explained that so beautifully. Um, I think for me, it was challenging to go from one culture to the other. I did feel very much like I wasn't accepted in either. And again, we talk about thoughts, right? Not all our thoughts are accurate or real, but they are our experience. So believing these thoughts created a lot of pain and suffering in my life. And so I'll give you an example. I'd go to India and I would try so hard to be Indian. My accent wasn't correct. My Hindi wasn't good. I tried to dress the part, and my cousins or aunts, uncles, they would laugh and they would say, they would say in Hindi, Are, kya kar rahi hai? You're not Indian. Why are you trying? You are Canadian. And I wanted so much to belong. And then I'd go back to Canada, and my skin color and my hair color and my eye color wasn't what the norm was and so then I didn't act that way. And my parents didn't have the means that some of the other kids had. And our parents were very traditional and very strict, and we had to be home. We couldn't stay so for a basketball game after class. And so I was other in school, different. And what I learned was I was trying so hard to fit in. And fitting in is very different than belonging, right? Fitting in is I will change everything about me so you will accept me. And belonging is I will remain true to myself, and that's why you will accept me. And so I didn't know much about belonging. I knew about fitting in. And wherever I tried to fit in, I felt very rejected. I wasn't Indian enough in India. I wasn't Canadian enough in Canada. And I was neither. I was nobody. And so and we were talking earlier about narratives and stories, and that's the story that I told myself to be true. And the stories we tell ourselves, we create self-fulfilling prophecies sometimes. And so for me, it became very true that I didn't belong, I didn't fit in, and I wasn't, for me, at a very young age, I wasn't good enough, or I was other. And that did perpetuate some of the experiences I ended up having later on. And, when I think about, you said the word trauma, and I want to just talk a little bit about what trauma is, because oftentimes we think trauma is this incredibly painful, overwhelming experience, and it can be, but it can also be an overwhelming emotional experience in which we are alone. That can also be traumatic. When we think about trauma and I live in the US, so I'll talk a little bit about the US. 1 in 5 people in the US, 1 in 5 adults have experienced sexual abuse. And it's more for women than men. 1 in 4 adults have experienced some sort of physical abuse. So it's a lot of people that have been through sexual abuse or physical abuse, or even just growing up and having experiences of being bullied or being treated in a way that wasn't kind or honoring. There's people who have experienced illnesses. There's people who have experienced divorce. There's people who have experienced, disconnection from others. So trauma shows up in so many different ways. And again, for me, the definition, because as psychologists and even the field of psychology, we have yet to come with one definition that we can all agree with. There's so many variations of it. So mine is an overwhelming experience in which you are alone. And if that's the case, then I had many experiences growing up, in which I felt alone and other and not good enough. And then that perpetuated into going into, some trauma as far as being a teenager, having abusive experiences, and then having abusive experiences as a young woman. And it just set me on this path of trying to understand, I think, trying to understand where I went wrong, why my life, what I thought my life would look like, and where my life took me. And when I landed there, I think I wanted some meaning, which, if I look back now, could have been the one thing that saved me. Because when we look at people who've been through trauma, we can separate them into 2 groups. One group goes through very painful experiences of whichever spectrum of trauma we can think about. And they might go into deep depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. They can go into a lifetime of pain and suffering, and which can even go into physical illness. And then we have another group of people who have experienced incredible trauma. And there's, as much as there is post-traumatic stress, there's also something called post-traumatic growth. So what separates these 2 groups, right? What makes one group kind of lock into that pain and go down the slope of depression, anxiety, and suffering? And what makes the other group grow spiritually, or have an understanding of their life and that narrative, and take some real responsibility for their life and even change their life? And the one word that I can come up with is meaning. The group that gives their life and their adversities meaning, they have different outcomes, perhaps more healthy outcomes than the group that doesn't give it meaning. So the group that doesn't give it meaning is, everything is random. Why did this happen to me? I mean, I was there for a very long time, so I'm not speaking of anyone but myself when I say that I was in the victim mode for a very long time, because I couldn't give my life meaning. I couldn't give my pain meaning. And then when I went back to school, I found meaning. oh, I went through these really challenging things in my life because now I can sit across from another human being and I can
Mm.
have compassion for them and I can say, I didn't, I don't pretend to know what you've been through by reading a book, but because I too have experienced suffering.
Yeah, and regarding trauma, I have never heard this simplified yet very, very meaningful definition, overwhelming experience when you are alone in that. And trust me, I have heard about PTSD so many times. So many psychologists have already talked with us in this podcast and everything, but I've never heard post-traumatic growth.
Mm,
And whenever you were relating this concept and this meaning, and how it contributes to the post-traumatic growth, the first thing you were, remember, before the podcast started, we were also talking
yeah.
about very informally among between you and
Mhm.
me, and I was immediately, the snapshot that came into my mind is obviously, men search for meaning.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I immediately, like, I was telling to myself why I didn't think it before. It is so vivid in front of us. Yes,
Mm,
that particular person is post-traumatic growth. It happened in the concentration camp,
yeah.
but that person is basically have given the meaning.
Yes.
And that meaning was kind of understanding that, yes, overall, he could find the meaning inside. And that is why his outside trauma became the measure of growth.
Beautiful.
Sorry, maybe I'm blabbering. So,
No, 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 every word. I'm hanging off every word because what you just said is so true. It is so true and it's so beautifully said. I could not agree more.
yes. So, whenever you are saying that, okay, this only difference between these two groups of meaning. So I said, okay, human being in search of meaning. Yes. Finally, I get a one line snippet of the whole book.
Yeah.
Finally, and thank you for that because this is in my bedside table and everything. So I read it
Mhm.
almost every now and then, but I never thought it like that. Post-traumatic growth, such a power phrase, such a power phrase because, and I'm, as you can easily imagine, I'm taking notes. So yeah. So what led you to, you were living in, because I'm trying to understand this because this will
Mhm.
resonate to so many of
Yeah.
our immigrant readers.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you are the live experience of that you have had made a good growth even after having those transitional experience and everything. So what, you were growing up in Canada, so you were in the school and you were growing up as an immigrant kid and you're trying to blend in, fit in, and then belong and everything. And what led you to return to your roots and incorporate mindfulness in your life?
Okay, so I had an arranged marriage, went back to India at the age of 20 from after growing up in the West. And something led me to, I was having an abusive experience in my teen years, and I didn't tell anyone.
Mhm.
And that's one of the hallmarks actually of shame, right? When we are being abused sexually or physically or emotionally in many different ways, especially when we're younger, we're children, we have really two experiences. One experience is, again, if we are alone in this kind of trauma, is one, it must be, I am exaggerating. This cannot be so bad. So I will downplay whatever
Oh,
my experience is. And the second one is, and it's my fault. Somehow it's my fault. Somehow I have done something to contribute to this. And this is, it comes back to like I tell this to parents all the time. If you have, let's say, had an argument with your child or raised your voice at your child, and I have, two children, so they're grown up now, but of course I've yelled at my children, and every parent at some point has yelled at their children.
Yeah.
That's not the problem. The problem is not yelling. The problem is there repair? Did we go back to our child and say to them, hey, I'm sorry that I yelled, that my anger predates you. My emotions and my dysregulation predates you. This is not about you. It's not your fault. I couldn't hold on to myself. And the reason I say this is because then there's not trauma. Then there's opportunity for repair. But
Yeah.
in my experience, there was no repair because there was no conversation, because there was me and my shame, and I didn't tell anyone. And so that perpetuated into me leaving, getting an arranged marriage, the arranged marriage being very traumatic and being very abusive. And it took a lot of years for me to get on this, again, healing, I guess, journey. And the journey, I tried different forms of therapy. And I think all forms of therapy are very useful. For me, different forms of therapy just meant that when we experience trauma, it actually affects our brain, right? Our amygdala, our limbic system is highly activated. Fear and anger are very, very much pronounced. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that has emotional regulation, that has the ability to slow down and rational, logical thought, what is the consequence of what I'm feeling or thinking or saying? All of that is in that moment. The best way I could explain it for myself was I was hijacked by my anger. I was hijacked by my fear. And so everything I'd been through with the trauma, I was not responding well in life. I was either angry or afraid or I was ashamed. And whatever modality of therapy I tried, it felt like I already had a very active mind. I already had all these thoughts and I was ruminating. And whatever I was thinking, even in therapy, was adding more thoughts to thoughts and more thoughts and thoughts. And it was only mindfulness that had me kind of drop out of all of this activity in the brain and actually got me into that role of what we call the observer or the witness. And it gave me the, again, experiential feeling of noticing that my mind was really troubled.
Mm.
And that was not the only part of me. That was just one part of me, but there was something else. There was this other presence. There was this quiet, open awareness. And when people, before this experience, when people would tell me, oh, go within, it's all within, I would get so angry. I'm like, where do I go? What is this within? Because talking about mindfulness is like talking about swimming. It's like watching a PowerPoint about swimming. Very different when you get in the water and you feel the waves and you are actually swimming than talking about swimming. So my understanding of mindfulness and the experience of mindfulness were very different. And once I experienced it, it's like once you taste it or once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And that started my journey of clarity and understanding who I am.
Yeah, explained in such a beautiful way, because it was the idea that how it was the next question that explained how mindfulness helps in observing thoughts and emotions without judgment and everything. So I'll mix the two questions. So how, in your experience as a mindfulness practitioner, that whenever you're observing your thoughts and emotions without judgment, how it helps and how it is different from other therapeutic approaches in addressing trauma.
Okay, so that's a great question. And I want to talk a little bit just kind of where we've come when it comes to therapeutic processing with trauma. And we can even go back to the beginning in psychology. You think about behaviorism, which was, really where you think about like Pavlov and Skinner and all these experiments, and you think about like, well, what were they doing? And they were looking at, how our environment affects us, right? And so we can actually mold and change people's behavior. So and we've all been through behaviorism, we've all been through some form of conditioning, right? So when we are children, when we are good, we are given praise and we are given a gold star and we're told good boy, good girl. When we're bad, supposedly what we consider bad, our parents take things away, including love, including acceptance. Our teachers might take something away from us. So we learn that, okay, that's a great way to mold and shape behavior. And psychologists have been doing this for many, many, many years, where they did it with rats and dogs. And we said, here, look, this is a way to shape people's behavior. But what happened was not everyone's behavior was shaped the same way, because people are different and people think differently. So let's just say, God forbid, if you and I were, we were in a car accident, God forbid, and we ended up in the hospital, and the doctor gave us the same prognosis, same exact experience, I might say, my life is over. I can't live like this. I would go into deep depression. I would want to end my life. You might say, life is so precious. I was given a second chance. I'm going to love and be kind to every soul I meet and change people's lives. So then we went from behaviorism to cognitive type therapies, because we realized we can't just train people to behave a certain way. People think differently. So we have to then look at how people are thinking. There can be neutral events, but the way we think about them is very different. Rain is a neutral event, but to a farmer, rain means something very different than a parade organizer, right? One person says, thank God it rained. My crops are not going to fail. I will have a wonderful season. And the other person says, I prepared for months and spent so much money and my day is ruined. It was the same event. And we realized that even in twin studies, we look at children who are, let's say, genetically, their predisposition, they're the same. They have the same genetic background. They even have the same conditioning. Parents were pretty much raised them the same way, but yet they're so different. So we started going into cognitive type therapies. Even that wasn't enough, because our mind and our body, as much as psychology thinks that that is, a lot of information that we can gain, introspection, and we can change, there was one big piece missing in psychology, and that was the spirit. We didn't account for there is something beyond the mind. There's something beyond just brain activity and just the body. What is the soul, the spirit? What is this part of us? And then we got into third wave therapies like acceptance commitment therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, these types of therapies that looked at people with trauma, with chronic pain, with PTSD. And we said, this is more than just thoughts. There is something more here. And I think for me, that question then became, what is that missing link for me? It's not just the therapy where I can restructure my thoughts, because that's what CBT does. It says, okay, you're having a hard time in life. Well, let's look at your thoughts and let's figure out, are you mind reading? Are you fortune telling? Are you catastrophizing? Black and white thinking, all these cognitive restructuring strategies we use. And it is helpful. But what if we went to the root cause and we said, and this is Michael Singer's words, not mine. Michael Singer says, instead of getting rid of your problems, let's look at the part of you that has a problem with everything. And that's the common denominator. It's the mind, the ego, constantly has a problem with everything. And the minute we solve one problem, there's another and another. And so are we going to constantly just restructure our thoughts and challenge our thoughts and reframe our thoughts? That's very helpful. But is it the root cause? And if the root cause is, maybe I am actually not getting to the real problem, that all these thoughts, good and bad, right or wrong, are simply thoughts. They're not me.
Yeah.
And so the part you talked about judging your thoughts, when we realize that the mind's job, the ego's job is to judge. That's its entire job. It's not doing anything wrong. It has to judge. Its job is to survive and to keep us safe. So it has to be looking out. It has to be vigilant and saying, okay, are you different? Are you the same? Are you safe? Are you not? Are you taller, shorter, bigger, richer? That is going to judge. But there's a part of me that doesn't actually have a body or a form or a role or a gender or an age. And that part also doesn't have any preferences. It doesn't have any clinging. It doesn't have any aversion. It doesn't have any suffering. That part is simply here to witness and allow all things to be. And if that is me, which I believe it is, then there is no judgment. It's just spaciousness. It's just space to allow all experiences to be.
I'm trying to relate in so many connecting dots. So what I used to listen to one of the podcast recently, all these checklists I have to click up, so I'm not finding any time that. But there was a line, and the speaker was once saying that think about life as a sport. You can participate, you can invest, you can score, you can win, you can be defeated, so many things. But what if you withdraw yourself from the sport?
Wow. Yeah.
Sit in the gallery,
Beautiful.
have popcorn,
Mm.
watch the sky, watch the green field, see the people playing, and you realize that it's a good game, but I'm just the witness. It's a nice game. I respect the players. I respect the game. I enjoy the game, watching, not playing, but I'm the witness. I know which people scored. I know which people are defeated. I know what the days the game is going on, but I'm in the gallery. I'm not in the field. And whoever is winning, whoever is defeated, I'm taking the enjoyment. I'm taking the pleasure of watching the game outside by being outside. So I'm just the witness.
So beautifully said.
And it was like I was whenever you were saying that the spirit, and by the way that you were explaining, you can say that all the traditional therapies, CBT and all, and starting from Pavlov's classical conditioning and everything, it is kind of a, we can say like very abruptly, I'm from a layman's understanding, it is kind of a quick fix.
Yeah.
I'm fixing the problem from very, very outside in the surface. But beneath the surface, what's the current? What's the situation? What's the flow of the water?
Yeah.
Let's have a deep dive. So whenever you're talking about spirit, you're talking about your understanding your emotions without judgment. It is going a bit deep dive. Now you are snorkeling. Now you are saying that, okay, coral reef is there. There are sharks. There are jellyfish. There are beautiful coral reefs. There are beautiful blue darkness and everything. So yeah, so fascinating. The way you presented it, fascinating. So I'm just enjoying every bit of the conversation, and I'm taking huge amount of notes on as well.
Well,
So
thank you. Well, thank you for actually sharing that experience of what's underneath the ocean, because so many of us, including myself, have never really, like, literally gone under the ocean and seen all these things, right?
yeah,
And how many of us spend our entire lifetimes never ever stepping foot in the water and
yeah,
never literally or figuratively going underneath and seeing, and there's a whole world
yeah.
down there.
Yeah. Basically, that's from a live experience as well. The first time I did the snorkeling, and
Yeah.
it's and around the coral rift. So my driving instructor, so who was the aide there, because there is always one person with you who is very skilled, because we are not habituated in that Fiat. So I was there half an hour or so, and I came out. I've never seen ocean like that. So I came out, and we were in the speedboat. We are coming back to the seashore. I couldn't speak, and I was continuously crying. And my instructor after that said to me, we had a coffee and everything. He never spoke. So because he's familiar with this kind of reaction. So he said, what you felt? I said, I felt like I am in a different universe. I could hear my heartbeat.
Mhm.
And in my eyes, I could see all those things. So then he said the magic line. He said that exactly same thing you will find if you go in deep with yourself.
Mm. Beautiful.
So I said, oh, okay. And he said that there are beautiful corals, there are beautiful animals out there, but there are also sharks, barracudas, octopus that don't let you swim, that
Yeah.
holds on to you, that limits your swimming capability. There are also coral reefs. You can sit there for hours and enjoy.
Wow.
You will see sharks, you will see whales, and you will learn a lot of things about life. And yeah, true. And after that, how many times I have been there, it was almost the same experience. So whenever you were saying, I was completely in that zone that I could easily relieve my that experience. So thank you for that.
No, I thank you for sharing that because I've heard this and I've never explored undersea the way you have. So hearing your what I would consider as a spiritual experience,
For sure.
right? And I've
For
heard that
me, at least for me.
for you, yes. And I've heard that from surfers and I've heard that from mountain climbers. And I
Same.
same. And it's like when you let go of the past and the future and you're so present
Yeah.
and you're so alive and it's like that's it, that's the zone, that's the
That's the
experience, and you explained it so beautifully. It was a visceral feeling I could experience with you that what
yeah.
you have shared. Yeah,
And I think it is nature.
it is nature. Nature
Or
brings
our
us, yeah.
yeah, our she works like exactly our mother. She is our mother, but she
Mm,
actually that, okay, my child has come to me with trauma,
mm,
with grief, with so much baggage.
yes.
So as a mom, what can I do?
Mm.
Give me some of your baggage.
Oh,
Leave it to me. Go
so
back light. You come to me heavy, you go back
mm,
from me light. So that's my experience. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
absolutely.
And
Thank
can you
you.
share one of the success stories, because you work as a trainer as well?
Hmm.
So one of the success stories that is the amount of the portion of the story that you can incident can you can share with me, that's fine, but share with us, that's fine. But any success story of mindfulness that you guided someone who was kind of feeling low about something, and you taught that person, you guided that person through mindfulness, and that person came out to be a completely different person in his or her daily life. Please.
Yeah. So I have a few stories, but one of them was a man that I was working with. I was working with him in a rehab, very successful gentleman. He had a very, very abusive childhood
Oh,
and had a lot of physical abuse from his very abusive alcoholic father. And so
oh,
he grew up to be actually very successful, right? So he's a large CEO, he had thousands of employees, he had these large companies. And when I talked to him, and of course he's numbing, he's using substances and alcohol to numb all of this childhood pain that he'd never healed.
mm,
So he ends up in this rehab. And I remember talking to him about mindfulness, and he kind of looked at me as if I was just like not on his level. And he did say, he said, I'm a very successful man. I
mm,
have businesses to run. I have thousands of employees.
yeah,
And this is not your little mindfulness thing, little lady. That's kind of how he addressed me.
yeah,
Is not, nothing I need. And give me practical strategies. Give me
yeah.
this. And so what happened was he had a reputation with the nurses at the rehab because he was an inpatient. The reputation was he was very angry and reactive. So and also, entitled. And I think entitlement comes from this lack of the ability to tolerate frustration. Because when you have that kind of success and that kind of wealth, people don't say no to you, and therefore you don't tolerate frustration well.
No.
So the nurses did not want to help him. They were always very, very frustrated with him. And a typical example would be they would go for a walk on the beach in the rehab, and he would show up, and sometimes the schedule would change. And the nurses would once didn't tell him, and he berated the nurse, yelled, screamed, called her names. They just, they all hated him, honestly, didn't like him, didn't want to work with him. So my job now is to work with this man who doesn't believe in mindfulness, doesn't believe in anything that I'm talking about. And I asked him, I said, I realize you're very successful. Tell me about your relationships. Tell me about the wife that doesn't want to live with you, the children who don't talk to you, the employees that fear you but don't respect you. And we started talking a little bit about some of his childhood experiences and a lot of the shame that came from. And here's the interesting thing that I was able to help him with is that right before he had an angry outburst, and I've had the same experience in my life, right before I get angry, really angry, like rage angry, which a lot of people with trauma experience, I asked him to slow down and think about what is the experience in your body right before you get angry, the second before you get angry. Just slow down and remember. And almost every person I've spoken to, they have the same experience. Right before we get angry, we feel helpless. There's that feeling of helplessness, this feeling of nothing is in my control. So if I can just control everyone and everything, then my life will be okay. So we sat with some of that helplessness, and we sat with the sadness that comes with feeling helpless as a child. Who sat with that young boy inside of him who probably felt very helpless and had no outlet, no voice, no comfort, no protection. And instead of pushing that little boy away and hating him and having all the self-hatred that he had inside and this need for control on the external, I asked him what it would be like for him to be able to actually control his own emotions instead of controlling other people's actions. And he found it very impossible to do. And we continued to separate, your thoughts and your feelings. Your thoughts are just thoughts. They're like cars driving down the road. You just watch them and you realize that you can get away from other people. You can get away from people that hurt you. You can get away from people that abuse you. You can fire people and hire people, but you can't get away from yourself. You're trapped. You're in here. And like you said earlier, if your experience inside is not safe and loving and kind, then you're constantly in a traumatic survival response. Because who's beating you up, who's shaming you, who's telling you you're terrible, who's telling you you're worthless, is your own inner self-critic. So we faced that. And we created some space. Like that inner critic was like right here on his face. And we created some space and said, okay, hey, inner critic, this is what happens with trauma. When we experience trauma and we feel helpless, the true part of ourselves, the real self, it freezes. And another part, we call it a protector part, shows up. That protector part is angry because it has to protect the real you. And so it's angry and aggressive and snapping. And that part is not a bad part. It still thinks you're 5 years old. It doesn't realize you're grown up and you're a man now. So let's talk to that part and just get him to just back off a little bit. And as we did some of this mindfulness work, the outcome of it was this. One day, he would always say to me, if I don't get angry, I have thousands of employees. I need to tell them who's boss. And I said, okay, instead of controlling them, you're going to control this. This is the only thing you have control of is your own thoughts.
Yeah.
And so after a few weeks of this, he went to the nurse's station. The nurse who was avoiding him, he said, "When are we going for the walk?" She said, "They already left," and walked away. And he went behind her and he said, okay, no problem. If they've gone, then I'll go to the gym and I'll work out in the gym instead." And so the nurse turned around and she came back to him and she said, uh, "I'm so sorry." She took responsibility. "We should have told you." He said, "No, no, no. It's okay. It's really okay. You know what? They left. I was going to exercise, right? I'll exercise in the gym. Same thing." And after that day, I asked him, I said, "Did you feel weak? And did you feel like everybody's, taking advantage of you?" He said, "I felt like the most powerful man on the planet because I was able to control my anger. I was able to control the story. I was able to control my actions. I didn't have any shame of how I treated the nurse. I felt good about myself." And so it was just a few weeks of him noticing that if he could control this, he didn't need to control this. And things started changing for him in a really positive way.
Yeah, such a beautiful story. And yeah, I think so many of us can relate to that because overall, I will dare to say globally, situations are becoming restless
Yeah.
in so many ways. We we are, I think we are feeling helplessness inside of us more often than previous times.
Mm.
So I think this story will really resonate with our audience and with the readers and with the listeners. So very quickly, we are very much at the end of the discussion. So, but I strongly feel like we are going to have more discussions and sessions like this.
I would love that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm really, really a firm believer in this because some of the conversations that we have in this channel, in this podcast and everything, that we feel strongly that we could not extract all the gems from this person in one session. There are
Yes.
so many other opportunities for beautiful excavations. So I'm already feeling in this conversation. So the second last question is, you mentioned and in your websites and some of your blogs that pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Yes,
So can you elaborate on this concept very briefly and how mindfulness plays in a role in this?
absolutely. Great question. Thank you. I love this question because it helped me to understand mindfulness. And very simply put, I wake up, I get out of bed, and I stub my toe. I hit my toe against the wall. That is pain. And it's inevitable. We will all experience pain. If we have this human body, we will all experience pain in some form.
Yeah, true.
That happened. Now, every thought I create after that, "I'm so stupid. I should have paid attention. Oh, why did this happen to me? Oh, why was the wall there? Why?" That is suffering. That is optional. We have complete control over that. And it is just the experience of when I am saying those words in my mind. I use 3 ways for me to do it. So when I worked at the rehab, I would do a talk, I would do a workshop. I would come out of the workshop and I would experience the same critical mind. "Oh, why did you say that? So stupid. You shouldn't have said that. That was dumb. Why did you share your own experience?" And mid-sentence, this was always happening in my brain because I grew up very active mind. I would stop that with 3 things. I would touch, I would hold myself. It would be a tone of kindness. And they would be words that this younger self inside of me needed to hear when she was a little girl. Something like, "Sweetie, you're okay. You're okay." Or, "I'll protect you." Or, "You're good." So to interrupt that mind that goes, that ruminating, self-critical talk, right? For me, talking isn't enough. That voice is loud. Touch disrupted it. The
Yeah.
tone that I would want a parent, a caregiver, someone to speak to me. Because, the way our parents speak to us, and especially growing up in an Indian household, our parents love us, but they're not always aware of how they speak to us. The way our parents speak to us, especially when we make a mistake, is the way we speak to ourselves when we make a mistake.
Mhm.
And so that inner dialogue had to be disrupted. And mindfulness is the way. If I can do it, like it took me a lot of years to speak to myself kindly after the fact. Then one day it was 5 minutes after. And one day through mindfulness, it was exactly in that moment. The minute I started berating myself, I was able to notice it, catch it, stop it, be compassionate to myself. And so that's why we say pain is going to happen, but how long you suffer, how much you suffer, to what degree you suffer is 100% in your control.
And lastly, for our very common readers, and the way you have explained it, it is completely understandable. Some of the practical mindful exercises or techniques to our listeners, to our viewers, to our readers that can help them. For example, everyone does not have an access to an expert like you. So in our daily life, in our daily day-to-day life, what are some very small, tiny, and very easy mindfulness practices that we can do that can at least lead ourselves to a healing journey, please?
So, yes, absolutely. So I would say the first one you mentioned already, which is nature. When we are in nature, we are in our truest nature. We can access our true nature much faster when we are observing a sunset or climbing a mountain. And there's a saying I love. It says, I'd rather be, um, you know, I think the saying is something like, I'd rather be in a fishing boat thinking about God instead of being in church thinking about fishing. So, get yourself into nature because there's so much spirit there. There's so much mindfulness there if we can see the relative, like the way that things move in nature and how everything has this ecosystem and everything works, and nobody is trying in nature. No flowers are trying to bloom.
No.
They're just blooming. Their dharma is there, right? Their true nature is being expressed in so many beautiful ways. Secondly, I would say for me, it was when I did not have time to meditate, when I did not have time to even reflect, what I noticed was when my mind is ruminating and I'm either in the past or future, it's mostly because I'm holding on to stress in my body. So I would say to the readers and listeners is if you are ruminating, you're thinking about the past, the future, you're not in this present moment, notice your shoulders. Notice your arms, your legs, and relax your shoulders, drop your shoulders, because what your mind is doing is your mind is ruminating, trying to solve the anxiety and stress in your body. But what happens if you release that stress by just relaxing your shoulders? Your mind gets quiet. It doesn't have a problem to solve. It's trying to eliminate this problem in the body. The other one would be the breath. And if you're not able to breathe from the diaphragm when you're having anxiety or you're depressed or sad or anything, lie down because you'll breathe deeper from your belly when you lie down. When you're breathing deeply, it sends a signal to your brain that there's no danger. Because imagine if you're really in danger. If there's a car coming at you, you cannot breathe calmly. It's the fight or flight will kick in. It will save you. You will jump out of the way. So fear is very good. It's like it protects us. Anxiety is there's the same physiological response, but there's no danger present. So just the breath, if you breathe deeply, it sends a signal to your brain that there's no danger present. And then, of course, grounding. Touch your hands, your legs, count, look at colors. I'll hear people talk about this happened, this happened, this. I'm like, but where are you right now? You're sitting in a chair in a comfortable room with someone safe. And all the pain that's happening is all happening in the mind. But physically, where you're sitting right now in this moment, you're okay. And this is the only moment we have.
Such powerful strategies and everything, and being in nature, relax and see the tension points in the body and try to relax, and then deeper breath. If it is possible, lie down, relax, close your eyes and everything, and rounding, like touch yourself tenderly and see the colors outside. Just get out of that mental cage.
Yes, exactly. You got it. You said
And
it.
be into this excellent environment or the pacifying environment I am in at this moment. So much powerful strategies, very small, but as most of the cases, small is beautiful. So it is going to be effective if anyone can be like doing it on a day-to-day basis, and they can faster their healing process.
And actually, one more, if you don't
Yes,
mind,
please.
I'll throw one more. It is the one that we forget the most, and it's when we notice. I always want to ask this of myself. Just notice who's noticing. And that takes us right back to the observer. Notice who's noticing all these things. Go there, live there, even for 1 minute a day.
That's age-old question. Who am I?
Who am I? Yeah.
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 On that beautiful note, we have just come to an end of this podcast. Thank you so very much. This is by far one of the deepest conversation I have on this podcast channel.
Oh, it's such a compliment coming from you. Thank
Yeah,
you. It's
one of the
truly a
most.
pleasure. And speaking with you, the time just flew by. It was everything we think of when we think of mindfulness, right? Like when you lose yourself and you're just in awe and you're experiencing everything wonderful. That was this experience for me speaking with you. So thank you.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much. And again, I'm saying this is not the first time and the last time we're talking. We will have more conversation with some other aspects of mindfulness, healing, trauma, and obviously the phrase that I have learned today, post-traumatic growth.
I would
Maybe
love
that
that.
can be a topic for our upcoming next conversation with you.
I look forward to it. Absolutely. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.